This episode is brought to you through a partnership with Suncoast Credit Union.
Welcome to the Ignite Project, a Polk County Public Schools podcast made for teachers, by teachers. Teachers of all experience levels need each other's enthusiasm and passion to fuel an ongoing desire to do what it takes to meet the needs of our students. And that's what this podcast is all about. Be energized by their enthusiasm to ignite a love for teaching while they challenge others to join them in their work. Join us now.
Hey there, welcome back to the Ignite Project. Today I have our special guest with us, Firdaus Ali from Kathleen Elementary, commonly known as Fairy to those who know her. We have an awesome topic for you today. We are bringing in this idea of inclusive design, something that is so needed right now. And we get to hear about how you actually get to integrate it into your classroom. So Fairy, we're so excited that you're here with us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you are. So just to give the audience a little bit of background on you, you are at Kathleen Elementary, been there for the past 6 years,
Yes.
and you are a fellow third grade teacher. You know, it's a special place in my heart for third grade. You teach all the subjects. You got your bachelor's degree in early childhood education from USF and just finished your master's degree pretty recently, I'm assuming, and from Southeastern University in Ed Leadership, because now you're on your way to the AP pool.
Yeah, I'm excited about the future and all the prospects that has.
Yeah, very cool. Definitely well-deserved. We got to meet each other in Leading from the Classroom, which we talk about all the time on this show. It's our teacher leadership program. And getting to really hear your heart for things that matter, especially when it comes to this idea of inclusive design. And then she even got to speak at our Emerge Symposium, our very first one, right? You were a breakout presenter and got to bring this idea there. So for some of you who are just kind of listening and they're like, okay, inclusive design, I'm trying to wrap my head around what that means. How would you define that?
So to me, inclusive design is bringing in that equity into the classroom based around students' lives and their voice. So you're going to be focusing on their race, gender, sexual orientation, disabilities, all of those different aspects, and knowing that you are focused on the student and their learning more so than just, hey, they're in third grade.
Right. That whole child piece that we're kind of looking at. And,
Yes.
and it's interesting to see the different elements between all the episodes. They all have been through upon different topics, but the common theme does seem to be about, recognizing more of the student than the grade that they turn in, right? That they're more than just a number in your class. So if I'm thinking about then trying to visualize it in your class, what does that look like or sound like? What does it feel like, I guess, when you have an inclusive design infused into your classroom?
So one of the first things that I really like to work on with my students is building that bond and trust that you have with your kids, and not just your students, with the families. So reaching out to my parents like the first week of school and letting them know, hey, I'm here. What can I do to help you? What situation are you in at home? So I can bring that understanding from their perspective into my classroom and know what my kids are feeling when they walk in the door the next morning.
Absolutely. That full rounded kind of perspective is so important, right? And so
Yes.
For some people, we've talked about inclusive design or non-inclusive design, building relationships. Mm-hmm. And so again, we're seeing that come in as a part, not just to manage student misbehavior, but also, or managing high expectations, but also to create this environment of equity. That's awesome. So what got you interested in this? What made this be something that you just became so passionate about?
Wow. So my family is a family of educators. My dad, my aunts were all educators, but my big brother, Jiwan Chanika, is actually, took education from just being a teacher a whole other step. And he became a superintendent in Ontario.
Oh, wow.
And then he started inclusive design, and they're currently rolling it out into schools in Canada for all the principals, where they're implementing this, and it's not a county, but
Right.
the whole district there
Right.
for them to include into their school system. And so they actually created a job just for him, where he's a superintendent of equity, anti-oppression, and anti-diversity, like just bringing in that diversity into
Right.
the class.
Wow. That is awesome. And, because, we all know, any educator knows, right? Like, we can say things are important, but when you put money behind it, then it really is important. So that's fantastic that they would see this is more than just, a theoretical, it's a great idea, figure out a way to integrate it, but to actually have it to be something that's set apart and saying, we have a position created and every school needs to integrate this and use it is fabulous.
Yeah, so basically it's a system and a structure that you basically take what you're already working on and what you already implement in your classroom, but being more specific and, just really focusing on those different threads. So there's like 6 different threads to it that teachers can implement with their students to make it just more effective.
Yeah. Awesome. Can you then dig deeper into that, like maybe one of those threads? What's one that you've seen maybe the most impact as you've worked with your students?
So one of the ones that I really love is environment as their teacher. So students walk into your classroom, your 4 walls, that's something you have control of or every day. Or the hallways in the school if you want to actually go a bigger wide in your system. So the 4 walls in your classroom, they're going to see posters that you put, signs that you have, different aspects that they're going to see every single day. And that's going to change their mindset when they walk in, depending on what you have posted. So if you have something that includes their voice and their lived experiences, that's where they're going to find that I belong here, that I really belong. So for me, one of the things that happened a couple years ago, I had a student in my classroom and his dad was part of the military and his dad came home and suffered with severe PTSD. And that was really difficult for him. But then what happened next was that he found his dad had committed suicide, and he actually found him.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was so heartbreaking. And so he had to still come to school every day with this pain and this hurt. And how do you deal with that in the classroom, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that I did was that one of the boards in my classroom, I put up the sign, support the troops. And I gave everyone just the random sticks that you pull in your classroom. I had the kids pick a random stick, and they wrote a positive note to each other, supporting each other and what they do well in the classroom. And we put that up in our room. So it was just that whole inclusive, positive, like, I accept you, you belong, and this is how you change the class for me. And so it builds that family feeling in your room.
Right. Wow. And I think the message for him too, I would feel if I was that student is, I see you. I know this is hard, and it doesn't need to be something that's maybe broadcasted to the entire, class, but to have that up there and have that kind of multiple meeting, like we're supporting each other, support our troops, that is so powerful. And I think that really kind of highlights the reason why we have to know our students more than kind of surface level and being able to say, to parent-teacher conference, so yeah, they're good at this, they do this, but to really know all that is going on and to know what makes them unique, then that you can have that. I love that the environment is their teacher and how common it might be to kind of just not really think about what's going on our walls or what we have around us in the classroom, but knowing this is where the students are spending their time, and that really kind of defines how they feel about themselves, and each other in the classroom. I love that. Great example.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So we you started hitting on that, right? Like the how. So starting with your environment, right? And knowing your students. Are there any other steps then that you would say if you wanted to have a classroom that really had this integrated throughout, not just surface level, but truly in every element, you have this idea of inclusive design? What structures do you have to have in place to make it get there?
So one of the biggest things is obviously that we always look at is data. So you have to look at your data and see the pattern of those students who have that achievement gap, and what can you do to close that achievement gap with your students. And so when you look at that, you usually find a pattern, and it's going to be those marginalized students that you see throughout. So you have your African American students, or the girls who won't join STEM as they get older, or your students with disability, and those are the ones that always have the huge gap. So how do you fill that gap and raise the bar? And so one part of that is knowing that you have to have those high expectations. But in order to do that, you have to start at that base level with your lowest quartile, and then have those same high expectations, but you're teaching at the base and working your way up. So everybody gets what they need.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I love that. We had the current Florida Teacher of the Year, Krista Stanley, on here not too long ago, and she was hitting on kind of that same thing of the power of expectations, meeting everyone where they're at, and giving them that support, and then getting everyone to that bar, right, and making sure they're all having access to it. But I love that you brought that up, that you need to know your students, you need to look at the data, you need to be able to see the ins and outs more maybe than just a test score, it sounds like, right? Like knowing
Yes.
other kind of data points as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, when you take their voice into consideration, so their lived experiences and their lives. So say, for instance, we're doing a lesson and our story last week had something about recycling in it. And our kids, you're like, oh, who recycles? And, you have like most of your kids raise their hand. And then there's that one kid and everyone's like, why don't you recycle? That's not a good thing,
Right.
Like you should be. And then when you actually ask that question, well, how does that work in your home? What do you do in your home? And you find out that when they eat Cool Whip on their dessert, mommy washes the container and they're storing the leftover dessert in that Cool Whip. So they don't have to put it in a recycling bin. That is their form of recycling. And so it brings in that in-depth, deeper discussion and perspectives from their lives and their lived experiences. And they go, oh, they get it now. Like they feel like I'm known and my voice is heard. And so they feel welcomed and they want to be there.
Right.
And they want to learn then.
It's like they're removing that judgment piece or that assumption that just because you don't do it my way, it must not be right. Right.
Yes.
And that, unfortunately, we see that more often than we'd probably like in today's society. So getting an opportunity, it sounds like really just to slow down and to ask questions and be curious about each other instead of thinking that recycling only looks this way. Instead to say, I also reuse things in this way. And that, with the recycling example, but to think of it big picture too, as they're having more complex conversations, the older that they get.
And so if as teachers we go, oh, slow down, I don't have the time to slow down.
Right.
But then when they're having those in-depth conversations, when you slow down, they learn more. And then you're spending less time trying to reiterate and teach the same thing over and over again because they've learned it in a different way.
I love it. I think that needs to go on a T-shirt or something. I agree. But we feel that pressure as teachers, like especially in tested grade levels, to feel like I've got to get all this in. I've got to make sure that they know it. And I cannot agree with you more. It seems so counterintuitive, but yes, if you just worked on one problem or had one quality discussion, that is so much more valuable than 100 problems of just kind of the basic routine, right? Or just a multiple choice kind of response to a text.
Quality over quantity, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, for me, when I started making that transition out of doing it routinely versus taking that step, for me, it was scary because I didn't really know what the students were going to say, But I heard once from a really great educator up in Jacksonville, he had said that the best way to be a good listener is to ask a question you don't know the answer to.
And that's one of the aspects of inclusive design is to know that everybody's different, including you as a teacher, and you can always learn from your students. So knowing that you go into it, that everybody's different,
right, and
accepting those differences and building upon it, and you tell your students, I don't know that, but that's really great. Thank you for teaching me that.
Yeah.
Then they go, oh, I owned this today. And it builds up their self-confidence and they go, I can do better. And so those high expectations don't become that high anymore because they have that mindset where they're like, okay, I can do this.
Right. It's achievable.
Yes.
And maybe because they don't have that pressure of it has to be a particular answer because, Miss Alana wants it a particular way. But maybe then that is kind of an entry point for teachers that are listening, right? Like take the pressure off of yourself that it needs to look exactly a certain way and have the faith that your students will meet you there by having these open discussions and giving them room and then with guidance too because you want to make sure it's a safe environment. So just before we move on to some other questions, I think that kind of opens the door. What kind of expectations, I guess, or guidelines do you have to put in place so that it's still a positive and respectful environment so that when they have these types of discussions, it doesn't get personal, it doesn't kind of get out of line? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a big part of having accountable talk in my classroom and having that respect for each other. And if someone does say something, and that usually only happens in the first couple weeks of the year, where they say something that's inappropriate, then you just quickly ask that question, would you like if someone said that to you? How would you feel if someone said that to you? And that usually ends that conversation.
Right.
And they don't say it again because they go, oh, Miss Ali doesn't respect that, or she doesn't like that. And at this point, they want to feel welcomed and they want to feel proud of what they've done because they know that they earned it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it. It's that intrinsic motivation that sometimes we find is so hard, but it's truly something that can be done with the time and knowing your students. That's awesome. So, I mean, this you can see already, like paying attention to these equity issues, bringing inclusive design, giving our students voice and having them take ownership over their learning and their relationships can be powerful in a classroom. And so then, you know, we always love to think outside the box. We're like, what if this one big picture? Like if we took it to scale, right? What if it took over an entire school? Or, you know, like you're looking to get into administration, right? Yeah. So if you got into that leadership role, that administrative role, and you had the power to say, okay, I really want to integrate this, then what do you think that would look like? What would the results be, do you think, if we put it to scale?
I mean, school-wide, one of the things that I'd want to do is reach out to my families, my parents in the community and say, how can we as a school be of service to you? What are your needs? And how can we help your child? And so then they're going to feel comfortable bringing their kids to school or get to school early or say, I need this. And, you know, if you're working with your community members, you're already going to pull in those donations or people who want to help out because they go, oh, this is a need.
Right.
And so it's being that positive liaison or a change agent,
right,
as I like to call it,
I love it.
in your, you know, in your community and knowing how to go, okay, we have to make a difference here. And so the school could be the center of that change.
Right.
To serving the community.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it. And then I think once teachers start having their own kids, you know, when I started teaching, I didn't have kids and now I have two. Your perspective is completely different. And being able to, you know, have my children's school reach out and say, what do you need? How can we support you? How can we support your kids?
Yes.
You know, how can we work together? I think would be absolutely incredible because then I agree. If you feel this safety and like you're part of a team and not necessarily me having to say, hey, my kid needs this and feeling you kind of this tug of war that sometimes we
that
feel.
isolation that comes about from it.
Right.
If you know your parents and you know their culture or the language that they speak or the food that they eat, just from a 5-minute conversation, you can learn so much. And those families are going to reach out to you. I mean, I have my parents who call me all the time and say, hey, this is what's going on. And they feel comfortable doing that.
Right.
So I know when their child walks in the next morning, how they're feeling, what their mindset is, and what I can do to change that. And so you end up not having those negative behaviors,
right,
which, you know, is from circumstances that happen at home, but you can uplift them and bring out those positive outcomes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love it. And I think as I'm hearing you even talking about like they call me all the time and we ask what they need and we try to help them. It seems like it's very much a paradigm shift of maybe the old school or the typical way that we may be familiar with, not just teaching, but I guess like the structures, you know, like when we have parent conferences and how we do it, right? Or how we interact with parents or just maybe expectations we have in class of the type of students and the behavior that we expect to see. And so I think doing this might mean you take phone calls at different times, right? Or I've seen other teachers set up like a Google number. So it's not their personal phone number because maybe they don't feel comfortable with that, but they think of a way to still make it possible. Zoom, I think, is going to be a huge help right
Absolutely,
now. Oh, my goodness, for getting to connect
parent
with
conferences
parents.
that you can just, you know, click a button and you're there with the parent and you're having those conversations. I mean, and there's so many different platforms for online communication that you don't have to have a phone call and your parents can text you on there and, you know, it's a private message, but you know what's going on. Even if you don't respond right that second, you still know because they feel like they can reach you.
Right.
Because they can pick up their phone even if they're working 2 or 3 jobs because Title I schools and most of Polk County is Title I schools.
Right.
Parents don't have time necessarily to check an agenda. It's not that they don't want to. It's that it's a hardship when they're working so many hours. And so how do you, you know, work around that so that your families go, oh, I can reach this teacher. And so using a program like that, you know, and they can just send a text.
Right. Right.
And they're like, oh, this teacher heard me.
Right. So it's more than even just hearing the students or valuing the uniqueness of your own students. It's their families too.
Absolutely, yes.
Right.
That's a huge part of it.
For sure. And it takes that judgment piece that I'm sure our students might feel sometimes and our parents might feel, but to say, I'm not here to judge you that you have whatever's going on. You didn't look at your child's agenda. I'm like, one job. It's hard to look at a child's agenda. But it takes that away. I love that. And you're really practicing what you preach and showing this goes beyond Miss Ali's walls. This isn't just for my classroom. It's for, for life. So then that kind of brings me to my next point is that I think obviously, I believe that teachers want to have an environment that's conducive to helping students grow into fantastic, positive, productive, compassionate human beings. But sometimes we don't know what we don't know and we get in our own way. And so I can think of so many examples, right, where I have said something or done something that really was counterproductive to what I was trying to do. And I didn't even notice I was doing it. So are there things you think that maybe we may not notice that we're doing that's actually getting in the way of creating this inclusive classroom?
So I think we have to be brave enough to have those tough conversations and say, okay, we have certain privileges in our life. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily you didn't work hard for those privileges or you're not blessed to have those privileges. That's okay. But we have to accept the fact that we do have those privileges.
Right.
And know the difference with our students who don't. Mm-hmm. And then bringing that in and keeping that mindset and that focus when you go into it so that you're always including them and not leaving someone out. And that's a big part of it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I love that you're saying it's things that maybe some of our teachers aren't necessarily feeling super comfortable to talk about or to say. And so maybe I think listening to podcasts like this, right, getting access to TED Talks or different resources to kind of expose yourself more and more. And kind of like what you were saying earlier about openly saying, I don't know, or having that out there to say, I'm really digging deeper into this, and I found this great, this awesome TED Talk or this awesome resource, and I'm bringing it now, and we can learn through it together. I think is great too. Do you have any resources that you think might be like really great for teachers who are trying to figure out how do I have these tough conversations with third graders, right, or with high schoolers, despite the age? How do we do that?
There's a lot of resources out there that talks about each of the different threads in a general sense. But if you're looking to tie it in all together, I will tell you that my brother's working on publishing a book.
Perfect.
And I'm not allowed to share any of that yet.
Funny.
But there are some basic resources, but articles that he has published that is on Huffington Post, or there's a couple things on YouTube and stuff like that. And so, I can always share those resources with you, and we can let teachers connect that way.
Yeah, I was hoping you would say that because we could definitely put it in the show notes. I'll get those from you. We can link them. So if you're looking for a way to say, okay, I need some first steps. I need to know what I'm doing here. Even if it's just a baby step. We were just talking with our teacher leaders. You're in there from the Leading from the Classroom reunion and talking about the impact 25% improvement makes over time on students' lives. So even if it's a 25% increase in what they're doing.
So yeah, just leadership from the classroom where we're talking about the opportunity myth.
Right.
And one of the things with marginalized students is looking at the demographics, and students who have a higher income, 5.4 times more they have grade appropriate material and that expectations.
Unbelievable.
And then if you have a classroom with 50% more of white or Caucasian students, they have 3.6 times more grade appropriate materials. Right. So where is the expectation for our marginalized students that really need to be seen and heard? And that's the tough discussion that we need to start having.
Absolutely. Sounds like it's even a discussion we need to have with our colleagues. Right. And our administrators saying, this is the data. This is where we're at. And we can't just be like, no, that's not real.
No, this is the pattern.
It's
right. And it's being shown not just across the United States, but Canada as well, because that's why they're implementing the structure there. So how do we change that? And we really have to look at those structures and school systems that it's in place.
Right. And now more than ever, we've seen kids, luckily, here we're back at school, but to have so much time outside of the classroom, and that gap is just getting wider and wider. So there was ever a time to start doing things like this, it's for sure now. So we always wrap up our show with the same question. And because this is the Ignite Project, and we're looking to get fantastic, passionate educators like yourself on here saying, I would love to ignite this and see it spread across the district. I think it would have amazing results. So if you were going to spark a change, what would you do? Like you would say, I want to ignite what?
I would want to ignite those brave conversations with my colleagues or with teachers or with schools to say, how can I make a difference, even if it's just in my classroom?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my goodness. You're giving me goosebumps because I'm one that's a people pleaser and it is hard.
It is hard.
It's so hard.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, and I think it's good for people to hear, no, it's hard. It's not just the people who are seemingly bold and brave that have those conversations. Everyone can have them.
Yes.
And they're worth having because if not you, then who? Right.
Yeah. I mean, we have the ability to change lives, and that's why we're educators. Mm-hmm. So how are we going to start taking our privilege of being an educator and changing students' lives?
Oh, well said. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is so needed and I think captured a lot of really valuable information, valuable resources. We're definitely going to plug in some things in the show notes and even look for some things to put in as far as people wanting to take those first steps with those tough conversations in their classroom and with their colleagues. So I appreciate you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jessica.
Yeah, no problem.
Are you fired up? You can continue to fuel the fire by connecting with us here in Teacher Engagement. Every month, we host virtual all-teacher seminars, and we also have ongoing programs designed to support teachers wherever they're at in their teaching career. Whether you're a new teacher or a teacher leader, there is a way to get plugged in. Follow us on social media at TeachEngagePCPS to see all that we have going on. Let's keep that spark alive and join forces with others who have chosen to stay ignited.
Thanks for joining us. You can subscribe to the Ignite Project on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, or watch online at the Polk County Public Schools YouTube channel. To learn more about the Ignite Project and other Polk County Public School podcasts, go to polkschoolsfl.com/podcasts.